When my parents left for their anniversary, my babysitter asked, "Where's your punishment room?" I laughed nervously. "We don't do time out. My parents don't even ground me." "Then we're starting today," she responded, dragging a chair towards our hallway closet. She was actually going to lock me in there. I pulled out my phone to text my parents that their babysitter was insane, but she snatched it. "No devices. Your parents' orders." I ran to the house phone and called Mom. She picked up immediately. "Mom, this babysitter is trying to lock me in a closet. Miss Vicky is in charge. Do what she says." Mom's voice was weirdly cold. "This is for your own good. See you Monday." Dad yelled from the background, "We love you." Click. They hung up. And before I had time to process, Miss Vicky had finished setting up the closet with just a wooden chair inside. Reflection begins now. 1 hour. For what? I didn't do anything. After what you did last Tuesday, your parents want immediate correction. She checked her watch. 59 minutes now. I sat in that dark closet, confused and angry, thinking about last Tuesday. I literally just went to school, came home, played Xbox. When the hour ended, she opened the door. "Dinner is what you've earned." She placed a bowl of plain white rice and a glass of water on the table. "This is insane. My parents would never—" "Shut up!" she screamed before throwing my glass against the wall. That evening, she made me handwrite a 500-word essay on respecting others' property. While I wrote, my phone buzzed from where she'd locked it in her bag. She checked it and her face got stern. "Your friend Marco is texting. He says, 'Did your dad find out about the Xbox thing?'" I had no idea what he was talking about. The next day, I woke up at 6 a.m. to the babysitter pulling off my blanket. "Labor builds character. You'll deep clean this entire house today." "Yeah, no, I'm not your maid. I'm calling child services." I rolled back over and pulled my pillow over my head. "This is completely legal. You can clean voluntarily, or I can stand here with an industrial bottle of bleach for 8 hours until you do." As I scrubbed the kitchen floor with a toothbrush, she took photos. "Your parents want documentation of accountability." She aimed her phone at me like I was some kind of criminal. I stopped trusting her after that. That afternoon, silent reflection. No speaking from 2 to 6 p.m. I sat there in silence while she read a book, occasionally looking up to make sure I hadn't moved. When I shifted positions, she'd snap, start over." 4 more hours. My sister texted and Miss Vicky read it aloud. "Tell him I'm sorry, but he shouldn't have used Dad's card for Xbox stuff." I never used Dad's card. I had my own debit card from birthday money. That evening, she made me watch a documentary about juvenile detention centers. Kids my age in orange jumpsuits talking about ruining their lives with one bad decision. "This could be your future if you don't learn now," she said during a scene about a kid who stole from his parents. "Your cellmate won't care that your ass is crying for mommy." I didn't steal anything. Denial is expected. Your father found the charges Tuesday night. She pulled out her phone and laughed while she recorded me crying. Your parents want to see what guilt looks like. But my parents still cut the crusts off my sandwiches and let me stay up as late as I wanted. Something wasn't adding up. The next morning, she woke me up at 5 a.m. by dumping a cup of ice water on my face. She took my mattress, dragging it to the garage. Thieves in prison sleep on concrete. Consider this practice. Made me ask permission for bathroom breaks. 3 minutes maximum. Supervised. My best friend Reese managed to sneak a call through the landline. "Dude, Marco is freaking out. He said his mom wants to talk to your parents about paying them back." Beep. Miss Vicky unplugged the phone from the wall. That's another night on the floor. That afternoon, she pulled out printed pages, bank statements with highlighted charges. 5 different charges of $99.99 each to Xbox Live. Still denying it? She pointed at the timestamps. 3:47 p.m. You were home from school. On Sunday morning, my sister called on Miss Vicky's phone. The babysitter finally let me talk, but kept it on speaker. "Just confess already," my sister said. "They know everything." "What do they know? I didn't do anything." My sister sighed. "Marco's mom showed them the Discord messages, idiot." "What Discord messages?" "The ones where you taught Marco how to use Dad's credit card info for Xbox purchases without getting caught. Where you literally wrote, 'Keep it under $100 each time so it doesn't flag the bank, and my dad never checks his statements anyway.'" Everything clicked. I had told Marco all that. I'd done it myself 3 times before and never got caught. But Marco was supposed to delete those messages. Miss Vicky took the phone back. "Your parents arrive in 2 hours. I recommend you prepare your confession." When my parents walked in, they looked exhausted. "Forget the money," Dad said. "We knew about that months ago. We were testing you." Mom nodded. "To see if you'd blame Marco, if you'd throw him under the bus to save yourself." I failed every test. "So here's what happens now," Dad continued, pulling out plane tickets. "Military school in Montana. Tonight." But Miss Vicky interrupted. "Actually, there's been a change of plans." She reached into her huge bag and pulled out this thick folder packed with papers. "Your parents hired me for something bigger than just a weekend." Mom and Dad looked at each other while she flipped through the pages. "Daily supervision after school for the next month, starting tomorrow." The plane tickets Dad was holding went right back into his pocket. She spread out this long contract on our coffee table with all these bullet points about daily check-ins and supervised homework and taking my devices away. Mom grabbed the pen and signed it right away. Dad stood there holding the pen for a while. Is this really necessary? Miss Vicky pointed at something in the folder. Pattern of deception, multiple thefts, teaching criminal behavior to peers. She tapped the contract. Military school costs $20,000 a semester. This costs $200 a day. Dad signed it. I started talking fast about getting a job and paying Marco's family back myself and doing whatever they wanted, but not another month with this woman. The decision is final, Mom said. You taught another kid to steal from his parents. My sister was watching from the stairs and actually looked sad for me. The rest of Sunday was just Miss Vicky setting up her new system with charts and schedules all over the kitchen. Monday after school, I walked in, and she was already there in our living room with a clipboard and this kitchen timer. She made me dump everything out of my backpack onto the floor and checked every single pocket and zipper. My phone went straight into her bag until homework was done. The timer got set for exactly 2 hours. I sat at the dining table doing math problems while she watched from the couch, taking notes about everything I did. Tuesday at the school was worse because Jet Huffman, the counselor, pulled me out of second period. He asked why I looked so tired, and I told him about the whole weekend with the closet and the floor and everything. He wrote stuff down in his notebook and said he needed to make some calls about what counts as appropriate discipline. Then at lunch, I saw Marco in the hallway, and he turned around and walked the other way as soon as he saw me. Word was getting around school about what happened. Some kids thought I was a snitch who got caught and ratted out Marco. Other kids heard I taught him how to steal from his parents. Reese still sat with me at lunch, but he kept looking around like he didn't want people to see us together. Wednesday after school, Miss Vicky had 4 pieces of paper lined up on the table. Apology letters to Marco, his mother, your father, and the credit card company. Each one had to be 500 words minimum explaining exactly what I did wrong. She set up her phone on this little tripod thing and filmed me writing them. Your parents want to see accountability in action. I wrote about teaching Marco the trick with keeping charges under $100 and how I knew it was wrong but did it anyway. Thursday, the house phone rang during dinner, and it was the school calling. Dad put it on speaker, and the secretary said Jet Huffman wanted to meet with him and Mom about my home situation. Miss Vicky grabbed the phone. I'm part of his support team. I should attend. The meeting got scheduled for Friday morning before classes started. We all drove to the school together Friday and sat in Jet's tiny office with barely enough chairs. He had this whole file spread out on his desk. I have concerns about some of the disciplinary methods being used, particularly the isolation and sleep deprivation. Mom got defensive right away. Traditional punishments never worked with him. Miss Vicky pulled out her credentials and some certificate about therapeutic behavioral modification. Everything I do is completely legal and evidence-based. Jet kept flipping through his papers. I'm required to document everything I'm told about a student's home environment. He looked right at my parents. If things escalate beyond what I've already heard, I'll have to involve Child Protective Services. Dad's face went white. Are you threatening us? Jet shook his head. I'm informing you of my mandatory reporting obligations. Dad turned to Mom. Maybe we have gone too far with this. Mom's voice got sharp. If we don't see this through, he'll never learn to take responsibility for anything. Miss Vicky pulled out her phone and started scrolling through videos she'd taken of me. The meeting ended with Jet writing notes about everything while my parents signed papers saying they understood his concerns. We drove home in silence, and I could feel the tension getting worse with every mile. That afternoon, the house phone rang, and Mom answered it on speaker while we sat at the kitchen table. A woman's voice came through clear and professional, saying she was Mariana Pope from the fraud department at Dad's bank. She needed to talk to me about the unauthorized charges on the credit card and had to determine if criminal charges should be filed. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up right there. Mom pushed the phone toward me and nodded that I should talk. Mariana asked me to explain exactly what happened with the Xbox purchases and how Marco got involved. I told her everything about teaching him the trick with keeping charges under $100 so they wouldn't flag the bank. She typed while I talked, and I could hear her keyboard clicking through the phone. When I tried to explain that I never thought Marco would actually do it, she cut me off. Intent didn't matter because I facilitated fraud and benefited from teaching someone else criminal behavior. She said she had to submit her report to the district attorney's office within 48 hours. After she hung up, Miss Vicky stood there with her arms crossed, looking satisfied. She told my parents this proved her program was necessary because I clearly didn't understand consequences. From now on, I'd need permission for bathroom breaks even at home and would have to log every minute of my day in a journal. She pulled out this thick notebook and showed me how to write down everything I did with exact times. Saturday morning, she woke me up at 6 and announced I had 6 hours of restorative labor ahead. She led me to the garage with cleaning supplies and a camera to document everything. The garage was packed with boxes and old furniture covered in dust and spider webs. She made me pull everything out onto the driveway and sort it into piles while she took pictures. Organization teaches discipline, she kept saying while I lifted heavy boxes. In one corner, I found a box of old photo albums from family vacations when I was little. There were pictures of us at the beach and Disney World back when everything was normal and happy. Looking at those photos while scrubbing oil stains off the concrete made everything feel so much worse. My back hurt, and my hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals, but she wouldn't let me take a real break. Just 5 minutes for water every hour while she filmed me drinking it for my parents. By noon, I'd only gotten through half the garage, but she made me keep going. That evening, after I'd finally finished and showered, the phone rang again. Mom answered, and I heard my Uncle Todd's voice asking about what was going on with me. She explained everything about the credit card theft and Marco and how we were dealing with it. Todd said he wanted to help and offered to hire me at his restaurant so I could earn money to pay everyone back. It was the first good news I'd had in days, but Miss Vicky grabbed the phone. She told him she'd need to supervise my work shifts to ensure accountability and proper behavior modification. Todd sounded confused but agreed to whatever she wanted if it meant helping me. Sunday morning, we all got in the car and drove to Marco's house for a meeting about restitution. My stomach was in knots the whole ride, knowing I'd have to face him and his family. Their living room felt tiny with Marco's mom and his sister Iris, plus my parents and Miss Vicky all squeezed in. Marco sat on the stairs where he could see everything but stayed separate from the group. Miss Vicky handed me the apology letter I'd written and told me to read it out loud. My hands shook as I read about being sorry for teaching him to steal and ruining our friendship. Marco stared at the floor, and his face turned red while his mom sat there with her arms crossed. When I finished, Iris started talking about how we needed a formal payment plan to make this right. She was in college studying pre-law and pulled out this contract she'd already drafted. It said I'd give 80% of everything I earned to their family until all $500 was paid back. Everyone had to sign it, including me, and she made copies for everyone to keep. Marco's mom said he'd lost all his gaming privileges indefinitely and wasn't allowed to hang out with me anymore. We drove home in silence again, and I went straight to my room feeling worse than ever. That night I couldn't sleep and heard my parents talking in their room down the hall. Dad's voice was louder than usual, saying $200 per day for Miss Vicky was insane. Mom argued back that military school would cost way more, and at least this was working. They went back and forth about money and whether 3 weeks of this woman was really necessary. Finally, they agreed to keep her for 2 more weeks and then reassess the situation. Monday at the school felt different because everyone was staring at me in the hallways. During third period, the principal's secretary came to my class and said I was needed in the office. My teacher looked concerned as I grabbed my stuff and followed the secretary down the hall. In the principal's office, a police officer was waiting with a notebook and badge that said, Axel Barker. He said he was following up on the fraud report from the bank and needed my official statement. The principal left us alone, and Officer Barker started asking questions about the Discord messages and credit card scheme. I told him the truth about everything because lying would only make things worse at this point. He wrote down every word about teaching Marco the trick and doing it myself 3 times before. When he finished writing, he explained that since I was a minor with no prior record, I'd probably get offered a diversion program. This meant community service and counseling and staying out of trouble for 6 months instead of going to court. It still sounded terrifying, but better than juvenile detention, which he said was the other option. He gave me papers for my parents to sign and said someone from the prosecutor's office would contact us soon. Miss Vicky was already pulling out this huge calendar from her bag before Officer Barker even left the office. She spread it across the principal's desk and started drawing boxes with different colored markers while muttering about structure and accountability. The principal looked uncomfortable watching her take over his workspace, but didn't say anything. She wrote diversion program in red letters across the top and started filling in time slots for every hour of my day. School got yellow blocks, homework got green, community service got blue, and something called reflection time got black. She snapped photos of each page and said my parents would get daily updates on my compliance. By the time she finished, there wasn't a single empty hour anywhere on that calendar. She folded it up and handed it to me, saying idle hands were what got me into this mess. The walk back to class felt longer than usual, with everyone staring through the classroom doors as I passed. That night, my parents signed all the papers Officer Barker left, and Miss Vicky taped the calendar to my bedroom wall. She stood there with her arms crossed, making sure I understood that any deviation would be reported to the court immediately. Tuesday morning came fast, and Mom drove me to the courthouse for my first meeting with the diversion program. The building was bigger than I expected, with metal detectors at the entrance and guards checking bags. We waited in a room full of other kids and their parents until a woman called my name. Elodie Waters had short gray hair and glasses that made her eyes look huge. She led us to a small office with certificates all over the walls and a desk covered in folders. Mom sat next to me while Elodie opened my file and started reading through the charges. She explained that completing the program meant no criminal record, but failing meant going to court. The requirements were simple but strict. 100 hours at the food bank, weekly check-ins, family counseling, and staying out of any trouble for 6 months. She handed me a paper to sign and said my first shift would be tomorrow after school. Her voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. She treated this like business and made it clear that excuses wouldn't work with her. Wednesday, I took the bus to the food bank instead of going home. The building used to be a grocery store, but now had signs about donations and volunteer hours. Inside smelled like cardboard and old vegetables. A man named Terrell met me at the front desk and showed me where to sign in. He didn't ask what I did or why I was there. He just handed me gloves and pointed to a mountain of canned goods that needed sorting. Other kids were already working and nobody talked much. We sorted beans from corn from soup for 3 hours straight. My back hurt from bending over boxes and my hands were sore from moving cans. Terrell checked my work once but mostly left us alone. When my shift ended, he signed my paper and said he'd see me next week. Thursday was worse because Miss Vicky drove me to our first family therapy appointment. The office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pizza place. Kieran Morrow looked younger than I expected, with a beard and jeans instead of a suit. His office had toys on the shelves, even though we weren't little kids. Mom and Dad sat on the couch while I got stuck in a chair facing everyone. Kieran asked Dad to start by explaining when he first noticed the charges. Dad's face got red as he admitted seeing them 2 months ago, but hoping I'd confess on my own. Mom jumped in saying she wanted to handle it immediately, but Dad kept putting it off. They started arguing about whose fault it was, until Kieran raised his hand for quiet. He asked me directly how it all started. I stared at my shoes and told them about wanting the new zombie game that cost $60. Dad had already said no when I asked for money, so I memorized his card number from when he ordered pizza online. The first charge was just $20 for game currency, and he never noticed. Then $40 the next month for a season pass. Then $60 for that zombie game I wanted. Each time got easier because nothing bad happened. When Marco complained about being too broke for games, I felt smart showing him my trick. I taught him to keep charges under 100 to avoid the bank calling and to delete purchase emails right away. Kieran wrote notes while I talked and asked if I understood why Dad felt betrayed. Friday at the school was brutal because everyone knew about the police visit. Kids whispered in the hallway and pointed when they thought I wasn't looking. Some girl I didn't even know called me a thief loud enough for everyone to hear. Marco's friends gave me dirty looks in the cafeteria, and one kid shoulder-checked me at my locker. Reese walked with me between classes, but said Marco's friends were planning something and I should watch out. Even teachers looked at me differently, like they were disappointed. That weekend, Miss Vicky announced her new plan for reflection sessions. She set up her phone on a tripod in our living room and made me sit in a chair facing the camera. For the next hour, she asked questions about my crimes while recording everything. She wanted details about every stolen dollar and what I spent it on. She asked why I thought I was smarter than the bank and whether I felt guilty. When I tried to explain, she cut me off saying she only wanted facts, not excuses. Sunday's session was even worse because she kept pushing about my criminal sophistication. She made me explain the whole system again with keeping charges small and deleting emails. She said this showed planning and premeditation, which made it worse than impulse stealing. Every answer I gave got twisted into proof that I was some kind of criminal mastermind. She played back parts of the recording and made me watch myself explaining the theft. Her phone stayed pointed at me the whole time like I was some kind of experiment. Monday morning, Uncle Todd picked me up before school to start working at his restaurant. The kitchen was already hot at 6 a.m. and smelled like grease and onions. He showed me the dish pit where I'd be working and how to load the industrial washer. The breakfast rush meant endless dirty plates and coffee cups and silverware. My shirt was soaked with sweat and dishwater within an hour. He didn't talk much except to show me how to scrape plates and stack them right. When the rush slowed, he had me prep vegetables for lunch. I peeled potatoes until my fingers cramped and chopped onions until my eyes burned. At the end of my shift, he handed me $60 in cash and said it would go straight to Marco's family. The money felt different from Xbox credits because I actually worked for it. Tuesday afternoon, Kieran called an emergency session after getting Miss Vicky's weekend recordings. He sat my parents down and said her methods were concerning him professionally. Dad looked confused while Mom defended hiring her, saying we needed strict boundaries. Kieran pulled out articles about punishment versus rehabilitation and explained that extreme measures often backfire with teenagers. Miss Vicky argued that she was getting results and I hadn't stolen anything since she arrived. Kieran kept pushing back against her methods, but my parents seemed torn between his professional opinion and the fact that I hadn't stolen anything else. The session ended with no real resolution, except that everyone would keep monitoring the situation. Wednesday morning, I walked into the food bank for my community service, and Terrell pointed me toward the sorting area where another kid my age was already working. He looked up from a box of canned goods and said he was there for shoplifting from 3 different stores over 2 months. We worked side by side, sorting donations into different bins, while he explained how the diversion program worked, and that completing it meant no criminal record. He made it sound manageable, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like maybe I could get through it. Thursday after school, I came home to find Dad standing in the doorway of my room looking mad. He showed me photos on his phone that Miss Vicky had sent him of my room, with every drawer pulled open and contents spread across the bed. She'd gone through everything while I was at the school, and photographed it all, claiming it was part of her assessment process. Dad called her immediately and told her she'd crossed a line, and that going through my stuff without permission wasn't part of their agreement. She argued that monitoring for stolen items was necessary, but Dad shut her down and said she needed to stick to the supervision hours they'd agreed on, and nothing else. Friday afternoon, the house phone rang, and Mom answered, then handed it to me with a serious look on her face. Rohit Anderson from the district attorney's office explained that they were officially offering me the juvenile diversion program, which meant 6 months of requirements but no formal charges if I completed everything successfully. My parents had to sign agreements too about family counseling and maintaining appropriate supervision at home. He emailed the paperwork and said we had a week to review and sign everything. That weekend, Miss Vicky showed up with a thick folder and her laptop ready to present her 2-week report to my parents. She pulled up charts and graphs showing my behavior patterns and compliance rates and claimed I needed at least another month of her intensive supervision. My parents looked exhausted as she talked about her fees adding up to almost $3,000 already, plus the therapy costs and the $500 we still owed Marco's family. Dad rubbed his temples and finally said 2 more weeks maximum, and then we were done with her services regardless of what she recommended. The next week brought a new development when Kieran's wife Laura started running a group session for families in the diversion program. My parents went Tuesday evening and came back looking different somehow. Mom had been crying and told me that hearing other parents talk about their kids' mistakes made her realize they weren't alone in this. One mother had talked about feeling like she'd failed her child when he got caught stealing, and Mom said she related to every word. Laura had explained that these situations often revealed family patterns that needed addressing, not just the kids' behavior. Wednesday evening, I attended my first peer support group led by Gavin, who turned out to be Kieran and Laura's son. He was 17 and had gone through the diversion program 2 years earlier for vandalism after spray painting buildings downtown. He talked openly about how angry and ashamed he'd felt at first, but said those feelings faded as he worked through the program. He told us the lessons stuck if we let them, and that he actually felt grateful now for getting caught before things escalated. By the 3rd week, I'd fallen into a routine that left no time for anything except obligations. School until 3, then either the food bank or Uncle Todd's restaurant until 6, then home for supervised homework with Miss Vicky watching, then therapy, or group sessions, then bed by 10. My body ached from the restaurant work, and my brain felt fried from all the therapy. But I hadn't even thought about video games or Discord in days. The structure was exhausting, but it kept me too busy to get into any more trouble, which was probably the whole point. Wednesday of that week, I walked up to Marco's house with an envelope containing $200 from my restaurant work. Iris answered the door and took the money professionally, giving me a typed receipt that showed the remaining balance of $300. I could see Marco sitting on the stairs behind her watching, but he didn't come down or say anything. His mom appeared and said he was still processing the betrayal and needed more time before he'd be ready to talk to me if ever. Thursday's family therapy session got intense when Kieran asked Dad about something he'd discovered. Dad admitted he'd been monitoring my old Discord account and showed us screenshots of messages from my gaming friends. Some were making jokes about me being in baby jail, while others seemed genuinely worried and asked if I was okay. Dad had been reading everything but hadn't responded to anyone. Kieran suggested I write a brief explanation to close things out properly, then delete the account entirely to remove the temptation. Friday at the school, Jet pulled me aside between classes to check how things were going. He'd been keeping tabs on the situation through official channels and teachers' observations. He noted that I looked tired but more stable than before, and my grades were actually improving without the gaming distraction. He reminded me his door was always open if I needed someone to talk to outside of all the mandatory sessions. The improvement was real, but it came at a cost of feeling like every minute of my life was scheduled and supervised and documented. Saturday morning, Miss Vicky showed up with a thick folder and spread papers across our dining table while announcing her final week would include something she called a behavioral assessment. She pulled out personality tests with hundreds of questions about how I'd react in different situations and made me sit there for 3 hours filling in bubbles while she watched. After that came essay prompts about my crimes where I had to write 500 words about why I taught Marco to steal and another 500 about the damage I'd caused. She set up her phone on a tripod and recorded me doing role-playing exercises where she'd pretend to be one of my friends asking me to do something illegal, and I had to practice saying no in different ways. The whole thing made me feel like some kind of lab rat being studied for a science experiment. Monday's assessment got even weirder when she brought up specific details about how I'd taught Marco the credit card trick in person at his house, but then deleted all our Discord messages about it afterward. She kept pushing me to admit this showed I knew what I was doing was wrong and that I was trying to cover my tracks. I tried explaining I was just being careful because I didn't want my parents finding out about the Xbox purchases, not because I was planning some big crime spree. She wrote down every single word I said in her notebook, muttering about how the court needed to understand my thought patterns and decision-making process. Tuesday morning, I was eating cereal when the doorbell rang, and Officer Barker stood there in his uniform, asking to speak with my parents. My stomach dropped, thinking I was about to get arrested, but he actually came with good news that Marco's family had decided not to press any additional charges since they were satisfied with the restitution agreement we'd worked out. He explained that as long as I completed the diversion program successfully, this whole mess wouldn't follow me to college or show up on background checks for jobs. Walking back to the kitchen after he left, I actually felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, which was real hope that maybe my life wasn't completely ruined after all. Wednesday at the food bank, I was stacking canned goods when Terrell came over and said I'd been doing really good work for the past few weeks. He asked if I'd thought about maybe continuing to volunteer, even after my required hours were done because they could always use the help. The question caught me off guard because I realized I actually might want to keep coming back, since helping people who really needed food made me feel useful in a way I'd never experienced before. Nobody there judged me or asked what I'd done to end up doing community service, and the other volunteers just treated me like a regular person. Thursday's family therapy session with Kieran focused on rebuilding trust between all of us, and he had us work together to create a family contract. We spent the whole hour writing down clear expectations and consequences that everyone could agree on, with Mom promising no more surprise babysitters or extreme punishments, and Dad agreeing to actually communicate when he was upset, instead of plotting elaborate tests. I had to promise no more lying or stealing, obviously, but also to be honest about my feelings instead of just pretending everything was fine all the time. Kieran typed it all up and printed copies for everyone to sign like it was some kind of official document. Friday marked Miss Vicky's last official day, and she showed up with a 20-page report she'd written about my progress over the past month. She sat at our kitchen table reading highlights to my parents about how I'd shown improvement in accountability and responsibility, but still recommended ongoing monitoring to ensure I didn't backslide. My parents thanked her for her services and handed her a check, but made it clear we'd be handling things internally from now on, with professional support from Kieran and the diversion program. She packed up all her folders and timers and clipboards and left without even saying goodbye to me directly. That weekend felt completely strange without her constant presence watching everything I did and timing my activities. My parents still enforced rules like checking my homework and limiting screen time, but they did it like normal parents instead of prison guards with stopwatches. Saturday night, we actually sat down for dinner together and talked about regular stuff like Dad's work project and Mom's book club instead of my crimes and rehabilitation. Sunday, we even watched a movie together on the couch, which hadn't happened since before this whole disaster started. Monday morning brought a meeting with Diana Rogers at the courthouse, where she reviewed all my progress so far as the court-appointed mediator. She went through her checklist noting I'd completed 40 hours of community service already, and my payments to Marco's family were on schedule, and therapy attendance was consistent. She smiled and said if I kept this pace up, I'd successfully complete the program, maybe even ahead of schedule. Walking through the school hallway Tuesday, I turned a corner and found myself face-to-face with Marco for the first time since everything exploded. We both froze for a second, just looking at each other, and then he gave me this tiny nod before walking past without saying anything. Reese caught up with me later and mentioned Marco had told him he didn't hate me anymore, but just couldn't trust me again after what happened, which hurt to hear, but made sense. Wednesday's shift at Uncle Todd's restaurant turned out to be the busiest night they'd had in weeks, with orders flying out constantly. I washed dishes and chopped vegetables for 6 hours straight until my hands were raw, but somehow the steady rhythm of the work felt good. Uncle Todd came back to check on me near closing time and mentioned that once I'd proven myself reliable for a few more weeks, he might start teaching me some actual cooking skills instead of just prep work. Having someone actually believe I could be better and learn something useful made me want to work even harder to prove him right. Thursday's meeting with Elodie Waters went better than expected. She flipped through my file, checking off all the boxes while I sat across from her in that small courthouse office that smelled like old coffee and printer ink. She looked up from the papers and actually smiled for once. Monthly check-ins from now on. She stamped something official looking and handed me a new schedule. Most kids in the program took way longer to get their requirements reduced, but I'd been hitting every deadline and showing up to everything on time. Friday brought our regular family therapy session, but this time my sister came along. She sat between my parents on Kieran's couch, picking at her nail polish, while he asked her why she wanted to be there. She started crying when she talked about how scared she'd been watching me change into someone she didn't recognize over the past year. The lying and sneaking around had gotten so bad she didn't know who I was anymore. We spent the rest of the hour working out a deal where she'd stop covering for me if I'd stop putting her in that position. 2 months had passed since this whole disaster started, and I walked into Marco's house with another envelope. $400 this time from all my restaurant shifts and some extra hours Uncle Todd had given me. Iris counted it carefully and wrote out a receipt while Marco's mom watched from the kitchen doorway. Only $100 left to pay, and this part would be over. Uncle Todd pulled me aside after my shift that week and told me I'd earned a raise. Not a huge one, but enough to notice in my paycheck. He'd been watching me show up early and stay late without complaining, and said that kind of work ethic deserved recognition. The money felt different when I'd actually worked for it instead of stealing it. Gavin's peer support group met every Tuesday in the basement of the community center. We'd been going through the motions for weeks, but something clicked during that session when we talked about triggers. One kid mentioned how volunteering at the food bank made him realize that wanting expensive video games was such a stupid problem compared to families who couldn't afford groceries. We spent the rest of the hour coming up with strategies for when we saw stuff we wanted but couldn't afford. Writing it down and waiting a week before deciding if we really needed it. Finding free alternatives. Remembering what happened last time we took shortcuts. School had mostly gone back to normal by then. Some kids still whispered when I walked by, but most had moved on to newer drama about who was dating who or whatever fight happened at last week's party. Jet Huffman stopped me in the hallway between classes to check how things were going. He said I looked healthier, and my teachers had mentioned I was actually paying attention in class now. Without staying up all night gaming, my grades had gone from barely passing to solid Bs and even an A in history. 3 months after everything exploded, I made the final $100 payment to Marco's family. Iris had all the paperwork ready and gave me the signed completion document I needed for court. Marco's mom thanked me for following through with the payments and said she hoped I'd learned something from all this. Marco watched from the top of the stairs but didn't come down. His mom said he still wasn't ready to talk, but maybe someday he'd be able to forgive me. Diana Rogers scheduled a review meeting the next week at the courthouse. She went through my entire case file, checking off each requirement like she was grading a test. Community service hours completed ahead of schedule. Full restitution paid. Perfect therapy attendance. No new incidents or violations. She typed up her report right there in front of me, recommending the court close my case 3 months early for exceeding all expectations. The actual court hearing only took about 10 minutes. Rohit Anderson stood up and told the judge I'd gone above and beyond what was required in the diversion program. The judge looked through the file and asked me if I understood that any future violations would result in immediate prosecution. I said yes, and meant it. She signed the order sealing my juvenile record and officially closing the case. My parents actually smiled at me for the first time since this whole thing started. That weekend, we had a small dinner at home to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and salad, but we all sat at the table together like a normal family. Dad said he'd noticed real changes in how I handled responsibility and thought about consequences now. Mom admitted she'd let fear make her go overboard with the whole Miss Vicky situation and should have handled things differently. We didn't pretend everything was perfect, but it felt like we were finally moving forward instead of just dealing with crisis after crisis. About a week later, I was at the grocery store grabbing milk for Mom when I turned the corner and almost ran straight into Miss Vicky. She was with another family and had her hand on some kid's shoulder while his parents picked out cereal. We locked eyes for a second, and she gave me this small nod before turning back to her new client. The kid looked miserable and exhausted, just like I had 3 months ago. I grabbed the milk and left without saying anything, but realized something had changed. She didn't scare me anymore because I understood now she was just doing the job my parents hired her for, even if her methods were completely insane. Uncle Todd called me into his office at the restaurant the next week and pushed a folder across his desk with employment paperwork inside. He said I'd shown up every shift for 3 months straight and never complained about washing dishes or mopping floors, which apparently impressed him more than he expected. The papers showed a raise to $12 an hour and guaranteed 20 hours a week during school, 30 in summer. I signed everything and shook his hand, feeling weird about having a real job that wasn't just paying back stolen money. He walked me through the kitchen and showed me the prep station where I'd start learning basic knife skills next week. The other cooks nodded at me differently now, like I belonged there instead of just being some kid doing community service. That Thursday was supposed to be our last family therapy session with Kieran, but when we got there, he had evaluation forms spread across his desk. He went through each category checking boxes about communication improvement and conflict resolution skills, while Mom and Dad answered his questions about how things felt at home now. After 40 minutes of reviewing our progress, he closed the folder and said we'd accomplished more than most families manage in a year of sessions. Dad asked if we should keep coming anyway since it helped us talk about stuff we used to ignore. Kieran suggested monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions and gave us worksheets to practice the communication tools at home. We scheduled the next appointment for 4 weeks out and walked to the car without the usual heavy silence that used to follow therapy. 6 months had passed since everything started when I spotted Marco at the school basketball game sitting with kids I didn't recognize. I was getting nachos at halftime when he walked over and stood next to me at the concession stand without saying anything at first. He grabbed a water bottle and finally said he didn't hate me anymore, but couldn't forgive me yet either. I told him I understood and started to walk away, but he said wait, and told me he respected how I handled everything after getting caught, paying his family back and doing all the court stuff without trying to dodge responsibility. We stood there for another minute before he went back to his friends, and I went back to mine, knowing we'd never hang out again, but at least the anger was gone. Spring came, and suddenly everyone was talking about graduation and college applications started showing up in my email. The criminal history question made my stomach drop every time, until I remembered Diana Rogers explaining that completing diversion meant I could honestly check no since my record was sealed. I filled out application after application, writing essays about overcoming challenges and learning from mistakes without mentioning the specific crimes that taught me those lessons. My grades had actually gone up since I stopped gaming all the time and started structuring my days around work and volunteering. The food bank scheduled me for regular Friday afternoon shifts now, and Terrell started having me train the new diversion kids who showed up scared and angry, just like I had 6 months ago. I showed them how to sort canned goods and stack boxes while telling them the program wasn't as bad as it seemed if they just did what they were supposed to do. One kid asked if I was staff and seemed shocked when Terrell said no. I was just another diversion kid who stuck around after finishing my hours. It felt good helping them see they weren't doomed just because they messed up once. At home, things settled into new patterns where Mom asked about my day and actually listened to the answer while Dad and I cooked dinner together on Sundays. We had family meetings every 2 weeks using the format Kieran taught us where everyone got 5 minutes to talk without interruption about anything bothering them. My sister started joining us for movie nights again instead of hiding in her room, and we even played board games sometimes without anyone getting mad about losing. The crisis that almost sent me to military school had somehow turned into us actually acting like a family, instead of just people living in the same house. Sitting in my room one night finishing homework, I thought about how different everything could have been if Marco's mom hadn't found those Discord messages. I probably would have kept stealing, maybe taught other kids, definitely gotten caught eventually, but with way worse consequences. Getting busted at 15 with $500 in Xbox charges sucked hard, but it stopped me before I became someone who thought stealing was normal. The months of punishment and programs and payments were awful, but they worked, making me understand that every crime has victims even when you tell yourself nobody gets hurt. These days, my routine runs like clockwork with school until 3, then either the restaurant or food bank until 7, homework until 9, then actual free time that I earned instead of stole. Reese comes over on weekends and we play basketball or go see movies with money I made washing dishes. My bank account has $400 saved from working extra shifts, and I'm planning to buy my own Xbox with cash I earned legally. The whole disaster that started with me teaching Marco to steal from my dad seems so stupid now, barely worth remembering except to remind myself how fast bad choices can wreck everything and how much work it takes to fix what you break. Thanks for wondering through all of this with me. It's been really interesting sharing these moments together. I'll catch you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.